zdziwicie się Państwo, kto to powiedział. Polska w newralgicznych momentach historii uratowała Europę i jest bardzo potrzebna dziś. Pokonali ocean, można powiedzieć, pod prąd modnych ataków na nasz kraj, po to, by oddać hołd Polakom, a przede wszystkim temu jednemu wyjątkowemu generałowi Maczkowi. Żołnierze kanadyjscy, kapitan Barry Sheehy, weteran kanadyjskiej armii, i kapitan Matt Sheehy, pilot Air Canada. W niezwykłej podróży do Polski towarzyszy im Aleksander Rybczyński, emigracyjny poeta i twórca portalu Polska-Kanada.
Tak.
To jest program Otwartym Tekstem. Ja się nazywam Ewa Stankiewicz. Zapraszam. Thank you very much for coming here. And first of all, I would like to ask why? Why have you came to Poland?
This journey began almost 20 years ago in Normandy, where we as a family, all three brothers, have taken a number of trips to Normandy, and we bring our children there. And we do that because it's important for them to understand, living in a peaceful society and insulated from many of the dangers in the world, to go to a place like Normandy, to understand that freedom is never free. And so that's the message we wanted our children to see and experience. And on one of these trips, all of us, the three of us, visited Mount Ormel, which is near Falaise. It was at Mount Ormel that the Falaise Gap was closed, trapping the German army in Normandy and ending the bloody Normandy campaign. And while we were there, we went up to the top of Mount Ormel, where there's a small museum to the 1st Polish Armored Division under General Maciek, honoring their role in the battle, because it was really the Poles that closed that gap. And if you picture the scene, and I saw it with the eye of a soldier, that this high ground basically acts like a cork in the bottle. And the whole of the remnants of the German army was desperately trying to push their way out of this sack, this cauldron that they were in. And they were flowing around really both sides of this high ground. The Poles managed to break through and get onto that high ground and dominate and prevent the Germans from leaving. The Germans were desperate to get out, and they even brought back SS Panzer divisions that had already escaped to come back and attack the Poles from the rear. The Poles were operating as part of the 1st Canadian Army at the time. They were referred to as the Winged Cavalry of the 1st Canadian Army. And they had managed to break through, but became isolated. So for 2 days, they were isolated on Mount Ormel, with nobody able to break through to them, with the German army attacking from the front and the SS Panzers from the rear. It was amongst the bloodiest fighting of the whole war. And some years ago, I met and worked on a project to honor a Canadian medical orderly who was 94, and he won the Legion of Honor from France. And he had been part of the 1st Canadian Army Hospital that was halfway between Caen and Falaise. And I asked him about the battle. And he said, yeah, as we got closer to Falaise, we began to receive truckloads and truckloads of Polish casualties. And I never forget what he said. He said, the brave Poles, we saved as many as we could. And when we were on that hill looking at what this isolated division, the 1st Polish Armored Division, faced for 2 days on their own before the Canadian Army broke through to them, I was moved almost to tears at the achievement, at the military achievement, at the bravery, at the tenacity, at the grit of the Poles. And so, as brothers, we said one day, when our lives had slowed down, because we were all busy with careers, when our lives slow down, we're going to come to Poland and pay a tribute to the brave Poles that held Mount Ormel. And it's taken us all these decades to get here, but we've got here and that's our primary purpose. Now, we have another purpose, which is to communicate back to Canadians the role of the Poles, the decisive role of the Poles in the Second World War, because we were surprised, and we're well educated. We were surprised how little we knew that the Poles had 250,000 troops, airmen, seamen, soldiers. They fought in North Africa, they fought in Italy, they fought in the Battle of Britain, they fought in the Battle of the Atlantic, they fought in Normandy, they fought across Northwest Europe. It was the Poles who captured Monte Cassino with the Canadian troops beside them, but it was the Polish flag that went up on the top of Monte Cassino. And it was the Poles who captured Mount Ormel and closed the Falaise Gap. And we were amazed at the breadth of the role of the Polish military and Polish scientists and Polish cryptographers and cryptoanalysts in decisively winning the war. So that's a story that's not often told, particularly to Canadians. One story that comes to mind, of course, Matt will talk about Squadron 303's the pilot, and it will talk about Jaruzelski, the famous test pilot for Canada's famous Avro Arrow. But the one story I remember well, and I wrote in an article entitled "No Greater Allies," was the story of the Bismarck, of the final days of the battleship Bismarck, when she was stricken and turning, and the first ship to come upon her in advance of the British fleet was a Polish destroyer. And now, this Polish destroyer is that size, and the Bismarck was the most powerful battleship in the Western Hemisphere. It was a monster, and it was circling and it was foggy, and the Polish captain was told to wait for the British fleet to catch up, but he didn't wait. He took his destroyer in to assault the Bismarck on a torpedo run, I presume. And as he broke through the fog and attacked the most powerful battleship in the world, he had on his semaphore a signal. And the signal was to the Germans, "We are Poles, we are Poles, we are Poles." So it's an extraordinary story. And by the way, they were ordered then to break off the attack and again wait for the British fleet. The Polish captain brought his destroyer around, attacked again. So the West owes Poland a debt of gratitude. And we also have to communicate a painful message to Canada, that the West, including Canada, abandoned Poland in 1945-46 at Yalta and the events following. And that's something that nobody really wants to talk about, but it was a shameful event, and it is part of history. It really happened, so you took these tremendously brave allies, courageous allies, and then who helped you in the war, and then you abandoned them as a matter of political convenience. So it's a shameful episode in the history of the West. And it's a story that we feel obligated to tell when we're in Canada on the CBC or TV or in radios or in publishing articles as I've done. So it's all that we can do. You know, it's all that we can do is to communicate this message. That's one of the reasons we came here. And one last observation before I'll close is that as an historian, if one steps back and looks, you find Poland coming again and again and again to the defense of the West. Whether it was at the gates of Vienna, or in 1920, or in the Second World War, the Poles have always come to the defense of the West. And the West has not always reciprocated that fidelity. And it's certainly clear to me that for a peaceful Europe and for a safe Western Europe, it requires a strong Poland at the center of Europe.
I will get back to this because I want to ask more about this, but before, I want to stress that this is big courage from you and braveness, because nowadays this is like against this mainstream. Nowadays it's not only that this Polish role in Second World War is forgotten, but this there is the try of present Poles as the nation responsible for the Second World War. We have a lot of these names nowadays in German newspapers and all over the world, Polish concentration camps, and many younger generations doesn't understand this is like on the German concentration camps in Poland, created in Poland, where Poles died also, and Jewish, but many millions of Poles generally during Second World War. But there is this, even in this education system, this Polish concentration camps, then also about Jewish, that only in Poland was the death penalty for saving the Jew, and there is the biggest amount of Poles who saved the Jew on the world. There is huge attack for Poland. So this is like against this mainstream. You are coming here, and why?
We don't mind being against the mainstream. I think it comes naturally to us. We're Canadians of Irish descent, so we don't mind a fight. You want to add to that?
Absolutely. It's very difficult to follow my brother, but I'll do my best. Yes, he told the whole story of how we originally, decided to come here and do what we're doing. There's, Barry was alluding to, the fact that we're Canadians, but of Irish descent. My grandfather came from Ireland, and my grandmother on the Sheehy side. And my father was a fireman, firefighter, captain. And
Canadian.
Yeah, Canadian. And he instilled, and my mother, instilled in us good values. And one of the things that we remember well is that if you believe in something, if you sincerely believe in it, say what you mean and mean what you say. Stand your ground, and an honest person an honest man can be a majority, one. And as Pope John said, be not afraid. So we're not. So we're here.
And thank you very much for this. This is very important, especially in such a moment. Pan towarzyszy w tej podróży braciom Sheehy. Jak to się stało, że jak się panowie poznaliście? Pan jest emigracyjnym poetą, publicystą, mieszka w Toronto od 30 lat.
Prawie 30, ale jeszcze nie ma 30, ale jest blisko. 27 lat.
I jak się poznaliście?
Poznaliśmy się dzięki portalowi Polska Kanada, który redaguje. Jest to skromny portal poświęcony właściwie literaturze i sztuce. Mamy wielu współpracowników, ale właściwie redaguje go sam wspólnie z pomocą żony, która jest grafikiem komputerowym, i ten skromny zespół robi wszystko. I portal jest poświęcony literaturze, sztuce, muzyce, ale w dzisiejszym świecie trudno ograniczyć się tylko do tych spraw. W sytuacji, kiedy wiele tematów jest przemilczanych przez media głównego nurtu i trudno pozostać obojętnym. Taka żyłka publicystyczna i potrzeba mówienia prawdy zmusza mnie do podejmowania tematów, które są pomijane, i mamy także duży zasób publicystyki dotyczącej zagrożeniom cywilizacji zachodniej, migracji, terrorowi poprawnej polityczności. I portal prowadzony jest głównie w języku polskim, ale ponieważ jesteśmy w Kanadzie, staram się też, by była zawartość w języku angielskim, i dzięki temu poznałem najpierw Matta Sheehy, który zwrócił się do mnie z taką sprawą kanadyjską, bo właśnie trzeba powiedzieć, że kapitanowie nie tylko interesują się historią, ale są zaangażowani w różne obywatelskie sprawy dotyczące aktualnych wydarzeń w Kanadzie. No i tak została ta znajomość nawiązana. No i potem dowiedziałem się o tej historii, którą opowiedział tu tak pięknie Barry, i o tym, że nadszedł czas, że chcieliby się wybrać do Polski, i zapytali mnie, jak to zrobić. No i od tego czasu zaczęły się przygotowania i udało się zainteresować IPN i jej prezesa doktora Jarosława Szarka, którzy zgodzili się podjąć trud organizacji tych uroczystości w Polsce.
A pan jest takim dobrym duchem tej podróży i przewodnikiem po Polsce, też po polskiej duszy.
No tak, ja jestem szczęśliwy, że znalazłem tak wspaniałych przyjaciół wśród Kanadyjczyków, takich, z którymi mogę o wszystkim porozmawiać i którzy doskonale się rozumiemy, i okazało się, że moja pomoc tu w Polsce też okazała się przydatna, bo to jednak jest duże przedsięwzięcie.
I wanted to be back from the very beginning. Why did you take your children to Normandy?
We've taken them to Normandy a number of times because it's very important for young children living in a peaceful democracy that has never been occupied to understand the true price of freedom, which is often very high. And the Poles understand that better than anybody. And so when you take children and you walk them through the military cemetery at Saint Laurent, above Omaha Beach, or you take them to the Canadian cemetery near Corsay-sur-Mer, or when we took them to Dieppe which is just up the coast, and you touch those graves and you see the names and you see the ages, 17, 18, 19. I mean, it's these are young people. They're almost children, and they gave their whole future away so that Europe could be free. It was an incredible sacrifice, and it's important for children to understand that, because otherwise you can get complacent and take your freedom for granted. Now that's something the Poles never do. You never take your freedom for granted, given your history and experience and some of your neighbors. But it's easy enough in Canada, with its great beauty and wide expanses and friendly neighbor to the south, that we've never been occupied. So it's important for them to touch those graves and to see the price that sometimes has to be paid. Because if you're not willing to pay the price, you can lose your freedom.
And this is what I wanted to ask, how today you can lose your freedom in contemporary world, this world which we know nowadays in Europe, nowadays in Canada, in States. What could be the price today?
There's a saying that if those who do not learn from history are bound to repeat it. And so, as Barry was speaking, and Alec and yourself, we discussed earlier, we have a sort of taking on a project called Project Magic, General Magic. He's a hero to us.
General Magic?
Yes. But he represents all heroes. His courage, his leadership, something we appreciate. We need more people like him. And in Poland, we've found quite a few, okay? And including yourself. So the other thing is, if you don't explain to our children and our population history, real honest to God history, not sugar-coated, we fought. Canadians did a lot in the Second World War. And they don't even teach that history in our school. To me, that's wrong. That's totally wrong. So our children are kind of living in a very comfortable, less stress environment, and they are totally unaware of the challenges and the dangers in this world. I've traveled, as a pilot all around the world, and I've witnessed and I enjoyed every different country I was in because of their ethnicity and all that, their food and their language, what have you. And I'm very saddened to see this attempt to turn everyone into some sort of a global environment where everyone's the same, no one challenges anything. It's going to lead, it already is leading to the slow decay of our Western society. So that's one of the reasons we're here. I want to thank you, and I want to thank the Polish people. And I'm not very good at languages, but I'll try it. Dziękuję.
This is very good.
I finally got it right. But I love my family, I love my children, I love my country, and I love my friends, and I will fight for them. And I'll fight for them. And Barry knows that if there's nothing else that I can do pretty well, I can fight, and I will. So that's why we're here.
We are very concerned about the homogenization of Western civilization, where all the differences are intended to be smoothed out. And what you may be left with is homogenized nothing. And so cooperation, interaction, even love between nations, very important. But the world is not all always about love. as Poland has learned. And so, for example, efforts by countries in Central Europe to preserve their language and their culture in the face of pressure from the EU, for example, we view as admirable. To be encouraged, not the EU, but Poland's stand on these issues, for example, to preserve your own culture, strike us as eminent good sense. And it is I find ironic, members of the EU, of which you're a member, your partners, have policies that are failing. You can see them, they're failing. And then they say, well, yes, they're failing, and we want you to do the same. Mm-hmm. It's nonsense. But standing up against that takes courage. And I can't imagine the pressure that Poland and the other SEDIC members are under from the EU on those issues. But I think sometimes I go back to the gates of Vienna. Is Poland once again standing at the gates of Vienna for the West, even as the West carps? And I sometimes, in an angry mood, in an angry exchange, and our Irish blood doesn't take much for that to come up. When people start poking on that, I say, then who surrendered Poland to the Russians? Who did it? Do you know? We did it. So, if you're in a glass house, don't be throwing stones. If you've never been occupied by the Germans on one side and then by the Russians, if you've never had your intelligentsia completely annihilated by the Russians and by the Germans, you've never been subject to a savage occupation, be careful with what you say about giving advice to the Poles, because perhaps the Poles understand this issue better than you do.
And by the way, this battle for freedom here, it's not. This is not the end. It still continues. We didn't jump out of this communism for good. For example, this next generations of judges who were first nominated by Russians, the first after Second World War, then also went. Then they were the Poles, but then they were their children who were punished and sentenced for the death, the real heroes, and their children's children, and there are many of those still, even like in this mood, in this soul, in majority as the judges. This is huge corruption, huge problem for Poland. So we didn't finish this fight, and this is European Union who prevent us to make the to reform this.
I had this conversation with somebody I know I like, and well educated, and just before we left, and he said, "Well, I'm concerned about this attempt to reform the legal system, the judiciary in Poland." I said, if you had your whole judiciary stacked with former communists, wouldn't you want to reform it? I mean, if you're trying to break into a new world and you're dragging this anchor behind you, and the judiciary has enormous power to say this is all right, this is not right, this is legal, how can you reform a country when you're fighting with an element of your own judiciary that is a part of an evil past?
Yes.
Of course it has to be reformed. Now, interestingly enough, when you explain it that way, people say, it's like you say in Canada, the dime drops. Boing, oh, I didn't know that. You didn't know that because you're not getting that from the mainstream media, right? The mainstream media is feeding you some very superficial, it's like history from a comic book, right? So take a step back and drop down one level and look at the facts. The people who understand the facts of this issue are the Poles. It's their country. It's their problem. It's their legacy, and they're doing their best to fix it. But when you put it that way to the average Canadian, if your judiciary was full of old communist holdovers who were interfering in your ability to move forward towards a new future, towards a democratic future, wouldn't you want to reform the judiciary? Oh, yes, I guess we would. Well, that's all they're doing.
So how to fight for the freedom of speech in the world nowadays?
Well, that's something my brother is very involved in Canada.
We have a tradition in Canada of freedom of speech, but it's not like the U.S. Constitutional guarantees. Ours is based on more tradition than anything else. And we have an old constitution, and we also have what they call a Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It's a charter. It's basically, we think this is a good idea. And the charter is a good piece of legislation, if you will. But in the last 20 years or so, the mainstream media and certain elitists all around the world are slowly eroding our freedom of speech. There's some legislation that is being moved forward in Parliament that would suggest that if I offend somebody by whatever I say, then I've committed a crime. It's a hate speech. Mm-hmm. And you know, it's like, I have a bit of a description of what's happening. Freedom of speech is not like a rheostat where you turn the light up, turn it down, you know, whatever mood you're in. It's an on and off switch. And we're about to turn it off. So we're fighting, Alec, myself, my brothers, and I have lots of associates all around the world. And we're going to fight for that. And we're not going to give up. And the Poles have been, they inspire us.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Very inspiring. It's good.
It's, yes.
People like you,
good.
People like Alec, Barry, and other folks that I know, we're going to win. So get ready, folks. We're on our way.
The mainstream media is losing their influence. They're losing their credibility. They're losing their viewership. People are moving to alternative medias. In terms of even Poland getting its message across, I spoke the other day, and they said, "Well, how do we get our message across?" Well, I said, "Well, don't try to do it through BBC. You know, you have to go over or around the mainstream media, but people are ready to listen. You know, there are challenges that we face with regard to, for example, our educational system. If our educational system doesn't teach history, if it doesn't teach values, we have Western values. Those Western values have served us well. Tradition of Judeo-Roman Greek tradition has served the world well. Look at the prosperity of the West. It's not an accident, right? And that prosperity is rooted in freedom and freedom of speech. And we know the examples. When you get a dictatorship, like the Soviet Union, and they suppress it, what happens? They get poor, their economy shrinks, and they collapse. Eventually, they collapse. And so the idea that Western civilization needs to be homogenized and fixed and changed. Now, every civilization evolves, every civilization makes mistakes, it learns, it moves. Yes, we must evolve, we must learn, we must grow. But to the idea that somehow we're looking for some homogeneous sameness is potentially lethal. And worse, if you can't debate that, which is what we're involved in, you know, you can't come out and debate that. You don't have to agree with me, but you have to hear me. But if you say, no, I don't want to, that's offensive, and we're going to get the police to hit you with a hate crime. That's what, and you're on the slippery slope, right? That's when people start saying, that's what worries me. Yeah. When people say, Oh, I agree with you when I tell them about the judges. Say, oh, I didn't know that. And you say, well, would you be willing to say that? Oh, I don't know, I might get in trouble. Hey, yeah, get in trouble. Get in trouble.
Czy pan ma również doświadczenia właśnie z taką cenzurą mainstreamu i jak to wygląda? Czy ludzie są tego świadomi?
Coraz bardziej są świadomi, chociaż nie wszyscy chcą się tym interesować i to dostrzegać. Narracją współczesnego świata jest teraźniejszość, dzień dzisiejszy i zapomina się o przyszłości, a nie interesuje się przyszłością, a o przyszłości się zapomina i wykorzystuje z niej tylko fakty, które są potrzebne do manipulacji ideami, które służą współczesnej globalizacji. Więc dlatego no, trzeba o tych sprawach, które są przemilczane, mówić, tak jak to kiedyś mówiliśmy za komuny, no i poruszać te sprawy. Także staramy się to robić na naszym portalu i na szczęście jest coraz więcej takich niezależnych mediów, które do tego zmierzają. Ostatnio właśnie jest bardzo ważna sprawa, o której też starałem się zasygnalizować i to zresztą widziałem, że w Polsce też się tym zainteresowano. Sprawa tak zwanego prawa autorskiego, dyrektywy Unii Europejskiej, która pod płaszczykiem ochrony praw autorskich zmierza do całkowitej kontroli przepływu informacji.
W internecie, tak zwane Akta 2.
Tak. I to przeszło, nie jest jeszcze to wprowadzone w życie, no ale jeżeli zostanie wprowadzone w życie, to właściwie zamknie wszystkim usta. Bo...
A robią to ludzie, którzy mają na sztandarach takie słowa jak wolność, swoboda, liberalizm.
To jest przerażające, że ten taki orwellowska wizja realizuje się w dzisiejszym niby demokratycznym, wolnym świecie, bo naprawdę można te analogie dostrzec w wielu sytuacjach.
Have you heard this phrase as Polish concentration camps? Why?
Yeah, I just like to add one little thing. We've heard it. We know it's wrong. They were German concentration camps. So
and the Poles were the first victims.
Once again, a false narrative. I don't know where it started, but it was sent out there. Now, a little aside here. My wife's Italian, and born in Italy, and you know, they moved here. They emigrated to Canada, and beautiful woman. She's suffered with me so long. I'm a lucky guy, but. They're quite involved in their community, and they're in groups like the Italian Canadian Congress, for example, is a Canadian-Italian community that promotes, you know, the advantages to the Italian community. But they went after a couple of newspapers, I won't say where, but it's in Canada, that started to equate anything that happened, any crime, or it was an Italian guy, oh, mafia. So they went after, they sued this newspaper, and they won. They said not all Italians are mafia. And it's the same kind of dynamic. You know, why do people do this? They put out that if you're Italian, you must be a mafiosa, and if you're Irish, you must be a braggart. Well, it could be true.
Yes, could be true.
But, so these are false narratives, and we need to correct them. I mean, I would love to see an organization, maybe IPNs, that sort of thing, to come out and say, we're going to decide, you know, Pinocchios. In the United States, they use a Pinocchio.
But why? How do you think? Where this comes from?
Well, I think it's it's a false narrative. It's not true. The Germans built the concentration camps. They planned it. They planned the final solution. The Poles were amongst the largest group to be prisoners and to suffer on it. The Poles lost more population in the war per capita than any combatant. And so the Poles have suffered more than anybody. I frankly have no idea where this came from. It just seems to be one of those things that comes out of the mainstream media. Frankly, it's a mystery to me where it comes from. I would suggest that it can be countered rationally with rational dialogue, but not through the mainstream media. It has to go around. On the other hand, I think Poland should not overreact. If it's wrong and it's nonsense, Poland is doing well. Poland is growing. Poland has a future. Poland has, we can feel it, has energy. You know, you don't want to get too involved in pushing back against a false narrative from a mainstream media that's losing ground every day with its own audience, right? So you have to counter it with rational discussion. So, you know, prove to me, show me the order that said the Poles built a concentration camp. Show me. It doesn't exist, right? Show me the order that put Poles in those concentration camps. Yes, that's true. And Jews and you know, Roma and other people suffered. So it would be a mistake to get too involved. You must respond, but don't become obsessed with responding, because your best answer is to move on, is to grow, is to move forward with your policies, is to not compromise on your policies. For example, on immigration, right? You've taken a tough, courageous stand on immigration, and with the other ascetic countries in Central Europe, it's the right position to take. I mean, from a logical point of view, think about it, logic. If the premise is wrong, then the result will be bad, right? Premise is right, the result likely to be good. Okay, here's the premise. There is a problem in the Middle East, there's a problem in North Africa, and the solution is to move the Middle East and North Africa to Europe. That's the solution. No, it's not a good premise. And if you follow that, it's going to lead to a bad result. And so you've adopted a rational decision. It's a rational position. Explain it, defend it, but don't compromise on it, and move on. Because the EU itself is in big trouble.
Could it be that this is continuation of this battle with Russians and Germans,
I don't
or
know.
not?
I mean, I don't know who is behind. You know, it's a crazy.
Source?
We're living in. It's an odd era. You know, the Germans have a saying, Zeitgeist, right? Spirit of the age, the year of the era. Well, people sometimes say things to me that I know are crazy, right? And smart people, you know, and well-educated. And once in a while they'll say something like, "Oh yeah, open immigration is a great idea. Wide open. You mean wide open? Yep, wide open. Yeah, let anybody." It's not a good idea. Yeah, and you wonder where it comes from. And there have been periods in history when people have been enamored with communism. It was the avant-garde idea of, you know, the 1920s. And there have been times when, in the 30s, when people were enamored with fascism. You know, we know now they're both bad ideas, but they gain momentum. It's you know, it's the zeitgeist. Where does it come from? I know in our case, our biggest problem is that in Canada, we've lost control of our educational system to a left of center narrative, and we have to regain that. That's going to take time, and that was complacency. You know.
You say that Poland has played important role in Europe in important moments. How do you see this challenge today? Like your
I see Poland standing tall on the issues of maintaining your own culture, of maintaining real borders, of controlling immigration, of investing in defense, up to 2% of your GDP, of working together with other Central European countries that have similar values, that are, all of those are very, in my view, progressive ideas. They're the right ideas, and Poland is again signaling, is again standing. You're standing at the gates of Vienna today, and it's Western Europe that has the crisis now. A crisis of confidence, a crisis of currency, a crisis of leadership. They now understand that the absolute open immigration was a policy that has led to a great deal of difficulty. Maybe within a generation they'll bring it under control, we hope, but it's a problem. And even their populations are recognizing it, and we're seeing that in the polls, we're seeing that in changes in government. The last thing Poland needs to do is take advice from, it's like if you live next to somebody and they make a big hole in their roof and it's leaking. And then they say, as a matter of policy, we want you, Poland, make a big hole in your roof, right? Well, you're going to see what he's going to say. You're not going to do it. In fact, better still, you're not going to follow that. Eventually, when they get enough water in, they're going to say, well, maybe the Poles were right, right? So the best thing you can do for Europe is stand at the gates of Vienna, stand by your principles, stand by your religious views, your cultural views, your values, protect yourselves, be strong, be the strength at the center of Europe. You think it's an accident that when they wanted to destabilize Europe, the Soviets took one half and the Germans took the other? Of what? Poland, because it was the key. It's still the key. So don't overreact to the narrative from a lost mainstream media, because all you need to do is look at the people that are following those policies and say, are they being successful? Are they happy with the result? They're not happy with the result. Stand your ground. Poland is going places. Poland is a country with a fabulous future, young population, full of energy, full of ideas, full of courage, as always. Don't follow their advice, follow your own.
Canadians were fighting shoulder by shoulder with Poles, or Poles shoulder by shoulder with Canadians for their freedom, and paid the highest price. What would be your message for future generations, for young people today, from your experience?
It's the Legion, I believe, has a motto that on November the 11th every year they use it, and it is, least we forget. So we need to remember these folks. We need to honor them. And if we do that, I think things will be all right.
We were allies in the past, we're allies in the present. We need to be allies going forward. We need to be shoulder to shoulder going forward.
Młodzież powinna szukać prawdziwych wartości i być im wierna i odnajdywać je w przeszłości i w przekonaniach swoich przodków. Tych, którzy walczyli o wolność i o taki świat, w którym możemy żyć, gdzie wszyscy są wolni i wierni wartościom i które tworzą naszą zachodnią cywilizację.
Dziękuję bardzo. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję.